HEMA is somehow related to like LARP or SCA or something of that nature. People see folks playing around with swords in the park, and they generally assume like, oh, they're doing role play or they're doing, something of that nature. And we try and consider ourselves a relatively serious martial art. I mean, we have fun with it, but end of the day, the primary function of what we do is like, it's about biomechanics, and it's about about the art of the sword, less than less so than like the sort of culture around like I'm Sir, whatever, representing this duchy. Exactly. From traditions, I suppose it makes sense to segue into what swords we use. So what we were demonstrating out here today were, the first one was the rapier, which is a sort of late medieval, early Renaissance into like early modern era weapon. It gets adopted in different times in different places and primarily comes out of Italy and spreads northwards and eastwards from there. Interestingly, the last weapon that we fought with, the longsword, is kind of a similar sort of thing, but east of the Rhine. It starts much earlier, but it persists a lot later as like the sort of de facto sort of honor. The Germans and Poles and folks east of the Rhine kind of generally have this perception of the stab, the thrust, as being like more barbaric than the cut. Primarily because if you're talking like 15th, 16th century medicine, if you take, a big old chop to the arm, or, you lose a nose or an ear or some fingers, it's nasty, it's ugly, but like the medical technology at the time, they could stitch that up, they'll pour boiling wine in there, and you'll probably be right as rain. Whereas if you take a metal point, you stick it anywhere inside of the torso cavity, you're not recovering with the medicine of the time. And so the other weapon that we demonstrated today was the saber, which is kind of one of the, I'd say it's probably the second most popular weapon within HEMA, the first being the longsword. And the saber's coming out of a more Eastern tradition. So the tree that we get all of our straight swords from is kind of all generally related back to the Roman gladius. That eventually becomes the spatha, which eventually evolves into a migration sword, arming sword, longsword, rapier, so on and so forth down the line. The saber comes from a Turco-Mongol sword, which is kind of a steppe weapon that kind of comes to Europe through the Mongol invasions. So most weekends, we're going to be at Thorpe Park from noon to 2. Our first 2 lessons are free. After that, our dues are $30 a month, which is all goes to keeping the lights on, renting dojo space when we do have rainy days or snowy days.